Please give it up for Marnie Freeman.
That's such a nice surprise. Okay. When I was young, 7 or 8 years old, we had an amazing babysitter. Her name was Janae. I can still remember her sparkly eyes, her shiny white teeth. She was one of the most amazing people I had ever met. And my brother, every time she would come to babysit us, I can remember him doing tricks and all these different things for her, and I would just sit there and watch him. And then pretty soon, I started joining in and doing tricks and jumping out of trees, anything to impress Janae. And then one day I said to myself, or I had the thought, I think I have a crush on Janae just like my brother. And it was a bit of a shock for me. And I remember thinking, but I could not help myself. I continued to do tricks every time she came to babysit us. Being raised in a Mormon family, when I was 14 years old, I was fully immersed in the Mormon culture. And church and family was everything that our life was about. And so at that point, I had started high school, and we had early morning seminary every day before we went to school. We prayed over all of our meals. We studied the scriptures every single day. We had church all day on Sundays. We had to wear a dress all day on Sundays. It was one of my worst things. We had young women's and young men's on Wednesday nights. We truly lived the Mormon faith. And we had an activity once a month where all the boys and all the girls would come together, and it was usually a fun activity. And I remember this activity because they called all of us at home and they said, listen, we want you to wear your Sunday best, come over to the church. And so everybody was dressed up, and I was in a dress. And so we showed up and got over to the church, and they ushered us into the chapel. And they said, there was someone special from Salt Lake, a high priest, had come to speak to us. And so, we were all age 12 to 18, and so you're quiet in the chapel, but everyone's wrestling around a little bit and waiting for the speaker to come. Well, he got up, and he got up to the pulpit, and he said, I'm here from Salt Lake, and I'm here to talk to you about something very, very serious. And he said, now I know that this does not apply to any of you. And then I heard the word homosexual. And at that point, I already knew that I was different. And I was already praying and fasting and reading my scriptures and asking God to change me. And I can remember breaking into a cold sweat. And I literally felt like I was going to throw up. I sat there and I was just frozen in my seat, and I don't even remember what else was said. When they finished, they ushered us all into the gym for refreshments, and I can remember just standing against the wall, not moving, just waiting to go home. And so it became this fervent quest for me. I read my scriptures, and I prayed, and I fasted, and I did everything I could and asked God, please, to change me. And I finally came up with an idea, and I thought, well, if I can go to BYU, lots of Mormon boys, if there's anything that can cure me, BYU. So being accepted into BYU in a Mormon family is a big deal, and nobody in my family had ever gone to BYU. And so I got into BYU. I remember being so excited. My family was so proud of me. And my parents were leaders in the church, and I was groomed to be a leader in the church as well. And so when you go to BYU, and this is not an exaggeration, there is something called a code of ethics. And it is this long, and it is small print, and it's exactly how you will act, your code of ethics, how you'll behave. And so I willingly signed that because I was so committed to finding a nice LDS boy and getting married and following exactly what I had been taught to do. And so when I hadn't been there long, and they asked me to be a spiritual living teacher. And I remember it was on a Sunday, and I was standing up in front of the congregation. We were in the chapel, and I was teaching, and somebody came in late, and I heard a door close, and I looked back, and I saw this woman walk in, and she was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. And I completely lost track of what I was saying. I couldn't even remember my name, let alone what I was saying. And for just a second, our eyes connected. And then she sat down, and I remember shuffling through I didn't know where, I just started somewhere. I didn't know if I'd already said it. I just went ahead and started going. And that night, later in the evening, we were living in the dorms, and I met her eating dinner, and we became fast friends. And we started spending all of our time together. And there were always lots of boys around her, asking her out on dates, and always a circle of boys around her, but we would go and we would hang out. Well, one night, I kissed her, and she kissed me back. And things progressed a little here and there, and we became involved. And 2 months later, I was expelled from BYU because of that code of ethics. And the sad thing is, being a Mormon, I called my own bishop and turned myself in. And I just can't help myself. I always turn myself in. But I can't tell you the shame and the guilt knowing that I was President Freeman's daughter and being sent home. And I will say it was the longest Greyhound bus ride I have ever had. I ended up coming to Oregon to go to Chinese medicine school. And a couple of years after I had graduated from school, it was a beautiful summer day, and there was a knock at my front door. And I opened the door, and a man was standing there, and he said, "I'm looking for Marnie Freeman." And I said, "Yes." And he said, "I'm looking for Marnie Freeman." He was very assertive. And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Are you Marnie Freeman?" And I said, "Yes." May I ask who's asking? And he said, "Well, I am a bishop from the Mormon Church." Now, I wasn't even in Utah. I don't even know how they found me. But the strange thing is, Mormon bishops really don't go to inactive members' houses. And to this day, I still don't know exactly how that happened. And he asked me to go to church, and I said, "I'm really not interested." And then he said, "Well, then I'd like you to have the visiting teachers or the home teachers, and that's either 2 men or 2 women who come and give you a lesson every month." And I said, "I'm really not interested in that." And he said, "Well," and he asked me again, "then at least you should come to church." And I said, "Thank you, but no thank you." So he finally said, "Maybe you should have your name removed from the records of the church." Now, my father was over many of the bishops, and so I knew that this was strange for a bishop to ask somebody to remove their name from the records of the church. I'd never heard of it. Usually they're doing everything to get you in, not out. And so I knew that if I did something like that, it would make my parents really sad, break their hearts. But also, being Mormon was in my blood. It was my culture. It was everything that I grew up in. I didn't want my name removed from the records of the church. So he kept pushing. And finally I said, "Listen, I'm lesbian. I don't have any desire to go to church right now, but I want to leave my name on the records." And when I looked at his face in that moment, I knew that I had made a grave mistake. So 2 months later, I was excommunicated from the Mormon Church. And about 2 weeks later, I received my letter of excommunication. And that night, the dream started. And I started having a dream every single night. And I had my dream 8 or 10 times a night. And I would wake up and I would think that something valuable had been taken from my nightstand. And I did it over and over and over again. And I would go back to sleep. I would memorize. I hardly had anything even on my nightstand. And I would memorize every single thing that was on it. And I would go back to sleep and I would have the dream again. And I would sit there and I would tell myself, I know that nobody came in here and took anything, but I never believed it. I was sure someone had taken something super important to me. And so the dream went on for years, for years. I could not get the dream to change. And finally, through the years, I finally got to where I was only having the dream 1 or 2 times a night. And then I got to a point finally where I wasn't having the dream unless I was really stressed or something hard happened. And a couple of years ago, I fell in love. And one night, I had the dream. And as I was, flying out of bed, she grabbed me and she pulled me close. And in that moment, the dream was over. I didn't have to sit and look at the nightstand. The dream was done. And it was one of the most amazing things. She was the first person to do something like that. And it changed something that had been torturing me for years. Well, in February, things got complicated and we split up. And the dream came back with a vengeance. And she wasn't there to grab me and pull me back in. And it was so incredibly difficult for me. When I look back at my life and I look back at how lucky I have been in so many ways, when I look back at Stonewall and the bravery of the people that stood on those front lines, and literally they were the foundation of gay rights. I mean, that's how everything started to happen and started to move through time for all of us, and I feel so incredibly grateful. And I think that what I have come to realize is I am so blessed and I am so lucky. Even though, with Mormons, we have something called genealogy, right? Everybody, and Mormons, we do a lot of genealogy. And when I was excommunicated from the Mormon Church, my name was erased from my genealogy line. And even though that is true, which was very difficult for me, my family still loves me. I have a family that truly loves me, and I have 2 young daughters that are becoming amazing young women. And I feel in myself that I am strong, and I'm resilient. And what I realize is that I don't know if I'll keep having that dream. I don't know if there will ever be a time that I don't have it. But what I do know is that it's not going to define me. Thank you.